But first, I figure that the vast majority of the public has probably got just 1 week left in them to fully focus on this federal election campaign. Campaign fatigue is on its way. And the reasons, I reckon, are fairly obvious. In reality, this is our third campaign period. The social media stats, which I'll talk about shortly, have shown a considerable turn-off on election discussion. And pre-polling begins in just a week from now, and Australians have shown a huge predilection to avoid polling day and the democracy sausage and vote early. The numbers who'll cast postal and pre-poll votes this time round are tipped to set a record. So, Scott Morrison and Anthony Albanese have just 1 week left, I figure, to reach hearts and change minds. Now, today we saw the Labor fraternity gather in Perth, trumpeting their fitness for office. We'll get to that shortly with Sky News host Ashley Gillen. But like all of these grand launches, there were plenty of promises. It was euphoric and the clap-o-meter worked overtime. But these are unchallenged events, and for that reason, they need to be treated with the cynicism they deserve. Just as we should when the coalition holds its grand launch, which is likely to be sometime next weekend. It is all smoke, it is all mirrors and backslapping, hyped up rubbish, and even a place where enemies sit together and smile nicely behind their leader. What we did get today, though, is the Sunday morning leak of Anthony Albanese's bizarre answer to housing affordability. A Labor government would help Australians enter the market by taking responsibility for up to 40% of their mortgage. It's a shared equity scheme. So for those who can't save enough, for those who can't afford the full mortgage and won't lower their expectations, they'll be propped up by the taxpayer.
This is about making people's mortgages smaller in the context of rising interest rates. This policy is about smaller deposits, smaller mortgages and smaller repayments to take the cost of living pressure off people and to get an extra 10,000 people into the market who wouldn't otherwise get in.
Could it drive up housing prices though?
Well, house prices have gone up.
Already red hot.
House prices went up something like 25% last year. There's been a moderation in more recent times. It's different in different parts of Australia. Our responsibility, long-term policy settings for a long-term problem. Making mortgages smaller in the context of rising interest rates will make it easier for more Australians.
Making mortgages smaller and taxpayers foot the bill. So Labor suggests the taxpayer will bail out mortgage holders to the tune of, on average, $380,000. Now, firstly, it's a $5 billion yearly spend, which tells that young cohort, oh, that you can skip saving. Don't worry about saving too much. The government's here. Oh, don't worry about, buying what you can only afford. No. Double that because the government can help out. And secondly, it adds a huge cash component to the market. Kieran touched on that this morning, which has the distinct prospect of increasing prices. That makes it even more unaffordable for many more home buyers. This was University Associate Professor in Finance and Banking, Peter Phillips, today on radio.
Will be. I always get a little bit concerned about these sorts of schemes and plans because they can end up having unintended consequences. And so, the first home buyers grants that came about 20 years ago sort of actually started propelling the house prices higher. So you've got to be careful with these sorts of plans that you don't create some unintended consequences and make things worse. So I hope they've done all of their modelling and analysis on that.
He's the expert, and there's a big difference between a $12,000 grant, which pays for some part of stamp duty, and carrying on a $380,000 mortgage. For many of you, myself included, we remember when interest rates under Keating were hovering around 18.5%. I moved from the city to the suburbs so I could have my first mortgage. I went 28 kilometres out of the city. 18.5% for so many of us to go without stuff, to sacrifice. It was a good lesson. It taught us the value of working hard to get into the housing market, and the government didn't prop any of us up or pay part of our mortgage, not that I can remember. How can you teach a generation that this save and sacrifice approach is no longer required? I think it's an extremely dangerous policy, which could also leave the government exposed to debt as well. Prospective home owners need a hand up, of course they do, but not a handout. It's welfare mentality. This was the Prime Minister's reaction to that policy today.
On the issue of housing, our plan is for Australians to own their own home, not for the government and Anthony Albanese to own your home. What the Labor Party is proposing today is, we all know that housing affordability is a tough issue. We do, and that's why we introduced the home guarantee. That's why we introduced Home Builder.
As I say, by Monday week, when pre-polling begins, campaign fatigue will set in. And so the leaders have one full week, I figure, to deliver their messages. We need to stop thinking about who's popular at the moment. We need to think about which side are the adults on, which side will handle economic pressures, there's more to come, regional security challenges, there's a lot more to come of that, and the next unforeseen crises. Forget your bias, forget who you've been voting for decades, forget about voting for minor parties who won't lead a garden party, let alone a political party. I can't think of a more critical time in our history when the right to vote is as important as it is now. And we need to consider that vote really seriously and look after what we have in this country.